Recording in progress.
Chair Williams, we're ready to begin.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning Commission this Tuesday evening, May 9th. I will now call this meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Ashley, will you please call roll?
Yes, Chair Williams,
Present?
Vice Chair Ebnetter,
Present.
Commissioner Nugent,
Present.
Commissioner Patel,
Present.
and Commissioner Wiggins.
Present.
All right, thank you. Good evening and welcome. We're excited to be here in person with options for virtual participation. For those attending in person, please complete a yellow request to speak slip and hand it to the clerk. And if you're participating remotely, use the raise your hand feature in Zoom and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. If you're calling in via phone only, press star 9 to raise your hand, and when you're called upon, press star 6 to unmute yourself. These options for public comment will remain available until I close the public comment period for that specific item. Okay, so going to the first item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Ashley, can you please read the consent calendar?
Yes, item number 1, Planning Commission meeting minutes approval. Approve the minutes of the regular meeting of April 11th, 2023.
Is there any member of the commission who would like to pull this item from the consent calendar? Any members of the public that would like to pull this item from the consent calendar? Okay.
Chair Williams, there are no public commenters.
Okay. Can anyone make a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Okay. Can we have a vote?
Yes, Chair Williams,
Abstain since I was not at that meeting.
Vice Chair Ebnetter,
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent,
Yes.
Commissioner Patel,
Yes.
and Commissioner Wiggins.
Yes.
Okay, great. With that, the meeting notes are approved. The consent calendar is approved. So next on the agenda is the public comment period. Members of the public wishing to comment on any item that is not appearing on the agenda may address the Planning Commission at this time. State law prevents the Commission from taking any action on any matter that's not on the agenda, but your comments may be referred to staff for follow-up. Public comment is generally limited to a total of 15 minutes. However, that is subject to the Planning Commission's discretion and can be extended if the Planning Commission wishes to do so. So I would like to open it to public comment and see if there are any speakers at this time.
Chair Williams, there are no speakers at this time.
I'm sorry, you said there are not? Okay, great.
Correct.
Okay, well, if there are no public speakers at this time, we can close the public comment period. Okay, so we'll move on to the public hearing portion of the agenda. And item 2, can you go ahead and read the item 2, please?
Yes, item number 2, appeal of a zoning administrator decision to approve a second-story addition to an existing single-family residence at 329 Greenfield Avenue, PA 2022-051.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start with the staff presentation, and I'll just go ahead and have you do the staff presentation now. Normally, we would be following that by an appellant presentation, the applicant presentation, clarifying questions, and then public comments. But rather than going through all that, why don't you?
Yes, thank you, Chair Williams. Good evening, Commissioners. Manira Sandhir, Planning Manager For the city, we had some recent developments on the item before you tonight. The appellant has requested a continuance because of a medical emergency, and that email request was shared with the commission and was also provided to you at the dais, and a copy of that was also placed at the front of the chambers. It's not unusual for the commission to consider such requests and typically grant like one continuance. The continuance would need commission deliberation and an action to continue the item. You have the choice to either continue it to a date certain or a date uncertain, or if you think that there is enough in the record to take a decision today, you could also hear the item, although I believe the city attorney may also provide some guidance to that, towards that. I also want to say that the appellant could not join, of course, and there was nobody to represent the appellant tonight. However, we do have the applicant present, so the commission may want to hear from the applicant or any other members of the public who may want to address the commission on the continuance request before you take any action on the continuance. Should you decide to hear the item tonight, staff is present to do the full presentation.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I think at this time, I would like to consider the continuance, and, but I understand that the applicant has an opportunity to address us with regards to our vote on a continuance. So at this time, would the applicant like to address us so that we can hear your side of the item before we vote on whether or not to continue the item?
Through the chair, is this specifically about the continuance?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah, specific to the request for a continuance. Yeah, if you would like to address us with regards to the request for a continuance, you're welcome to do that now. And then we can consider and deliberate whether or not to continue the item for when the appellant is available.
Hi, I'm Jessica Sin. I'm the project architect for the project, and we would like to have the commission here upon our project today. This is not our first change of date. We've already accommodated for the appellant's request for a change of date for today's meeting. So, and this very much happened immediately, a couple hours ago, and so, we're well prepared to address your comments, and especially if you have already reviewed the project and looked at the items already and have something in mind for your decision.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I want to put it to the Planning Commission, this question of a continuance, and see if you have any comments or questions, and then we can take a vote on whether or not we'll continue it.
Through the chair, I have a question for staff. The appellant, the group we just heard from mentioned that there has already been one date change. Can you confirm how many date changes there have been to date?
Mm-hmm. Yes, through the chair, this is the first time that the item has come before the Planning Commission in a public hearing, so there hasn't been a formal continuance of the item. My understanding is that there were some conversations earlier looking at, options for the second meeting in April to accommodate the item. However, the appellant was traveling at the time, and so the May date was picked. Again, as I mentioned before, it isn't unusual due to extenuating circumstances to grant one continuance, but ultimately it's up to the commission. And I do want to see if the city attorney would like to add to that.
Good evening, Mazarine Bakaria, Assistant City Attorney. I just want to state that we do want to protect all parties' due process rights, and due process typically involves a notice and opportunity to be heard. That being said, and as the planning manager stated, this would be the first formal continuance for the appellant, so please keep in mind that there are due process considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions?
Through the chair, one more clarifying question, probably for the city attorney or for staff. Is there any guideline or any further detail when it comes to due process related to medical emergencies?
I'm not aware of any special carve-out for medical versus non-medical reasons, but again, it has been our typical practice to grant one continuance, and despite negotiation about this date for the formal hearing, this would be the first hearing. And just to add to your consideration, if we wanted to continue the item to a date certain, it would require less renoticing, but at the same time, that's something that the Planning Commission can decide.
Through the chair, if I could add to that, so the continuance can take two forms. So if it's to a date certain, which could be either the next meeting, which is May 23rd, or the first June meeting, June 13th, like that does provide more certainty to the applicant and also avoids like the renoticing. The other option would be to continue it to a date uncertain. However, staff recommends that perhaps the Planning Commission consider a date certain continuance if that is the path the commission would like to.
So I have a question about that. So if we continued it to a date certain and we would pick a date like the next meeting to not, to try to minimize the delay. That allows due process to the person appealing because then they have time to perhaps find somebody else to stand in for them.
That is correct.
Okay, so that's a satisfactory, that could be deemed a satisfactory solution, I guess, in my mind. So, any other questions? Okay. Does anybody want to make any comments before we take a vote on whether or not to grant the continuance?
Through the chair, my only comment is if we do vote to grant a continuance, that we try to do it as soon as possible to the next meeting to minimize the delay to the parties involved. And I guess I have a clarifying question for staff, which is there room on the agenda for the, I think you said May 23rd meeting?
Yes, through the chair, currently we only have one item that's under preparation, so we can certainly accommodate a continuance either on May 23rd or June 13th. I would recommend to the chair and to the commission, if you'd like to ask the applicant, since they're present, whether the May 23rd date works for them or the June 13th date works for them.
Okay, at this time, I'll ask the applicants, does the next meeting, which you said, I think it says May 23rd, work for you? Again, we want to get it back on the calendar as quickly as possible if we decide to continue it.
Yes, May 23rd works for us.
It works, okay, good.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on this. So I think an important thing for us to consider as a commission is that we ensure that due process is followed so that the appeal does not potentially get appealed again or go to another level if we were to follow the staff's recommendation. So that's why I would prefer to avoid delaying the decision, but under those circumstances, I think that it would be safer for both the applicant and the commission to continue it. And I think that personally, I would like to continue it at the next Planning Commission meeting in May.
Okay. Yeah, my only comment would be, I agree with you that I think that we want to be sure there are no questions left for you. If we went ahead tonight, there could still be, questions or issues remaining from the appellant. Is that the right word? So we want to make sure it's sort of, covered clearly when we do hear it. So I think we should take a vote as to, I guess I would like to ask if there's a motion to grant a continuance to the.
I'd like to make a motion to continue this to a date certain of May 23rd.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chair Williams?
I guess I should have approved, or I'm not sure how I respond to that. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Vice Chair Nutter?
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent?
Yes.
Commissioner Patel,
Yes.
and Commissioner Wiggins.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So your project is being continued to May 23rd, and we'll see you back here then. And sorry for the delay, but we look forward to seeing you at that time. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item number 3.
Item number 3, zoning code amendments for city projects, modifications to planning applications, and height limitations and exemptions, ordinance recommendation.
All right, thank you. So at this point, we'll start with a staff presentation, followed by clarifying questions from the Planning Commission, and then move on to any public comments, if there are any. Members of the public will be given 2 to 3 minutes to speak, depending on the number of speakers. Once the public hearing is closed, the commission will deliberate and provide a recommendation to City Council. So, Julia, let us know when you're ready.
I am ready. Thank you,
Great.
Commissioner. Chair Williams, good evening, Commissioners and members of the public. My name is Julie Klein, Principal Planner, and I'm here this evening presenting on agenda item number 3. These are proposed ordinance changes to the zoning code pertaining to city projects, modifications to planning applications, and building height limitations and exemptions. I'll start with a brief agenda with this introduction, and then I'll go through the rest of the slides, which includes an overview of the proposed ordinance that'll cover the group of changes pertaining to city projects, modifications to approved planning applications, height limitations and exemptions, and then we'll end with a slide regarding the recommendation and next steps. So the first group of code amendments is intended to streamline the review process for city projects. Currently, the zoning code requires PC level, which is Planning Commission level review on both large city projects as well as minor city projects, adding time and cost that we're seeking through this code amendment and an option to streamline the process and potentially that save time and money. So the proposed amendment would clarify and streamline the review process for city projects, allowing for exemption of certain type projects as outlined in the staff report. It would also allow for the zoning administrator review and decision on minor projects. It would also provide an option for the city council to require fewer public hearings before multiple commissions before making a recommendation to city council. So currently that option is not available through the code. For minor projects, what this may mean is that it may reduce the number of public hearings before multiple commissions. For larger projects, the city council would still have the ability to require review through multiple commissions before making, the formal recommendation to city council. So that power would still be retained. The second group of changes pertain to modifications to approved planning applications. This currently in the zoning code, it is not clear. The language is not clear regarding the different types of changes that may be necessary, either during construction or during the building permit process if it's been a few years after the entitlement. And so with the proposed change, what we're trying to do is provide a clear differentiation between the different types of changes and the review paths for those, whether it's through a building permit or a planning commission review. So this slide shows that the proposed amendment, the purpose would be to distinguish the different review levels with simple changes that are in substantial conformance with the original approved planning application going through a building permit review process. For minor changes, and again, within the staff report, there's a list of criteria for projects that meet the minor modification category. These would require planning application process at the zone administrator decision level. And for larger changes that typically have more sort of significant changes to either the site plan or the design or the uses on the property, or trigger new or increased environmental issues, those would be identified to go through the major modification process. So there would be, through the code, clear criteria for each of these three categories, and then the review process for each would also be spelled out so that it's clear for staff and for applicants what those processes are. It's important to note that the cumulative changes that are proposed by developers, each would be reviewed by the zoning administrator, so there is some case-by-case discretion in determining the type of review process that they would go through. And the last group of change pertains to the building height and limitations. Currently, the types of elements of the building that are exempt from the building height is located in a section that's titled Use in Bulk. It's also located in a section that's not obvious, when a member of the public is looking. So we're proposing to retitle that. Additionally, the list of exemptions was last updated in 1981. It's not reflective of current rooftop elements or mechanical equipment that may be needed in newer buildings or when existing buildings are upgraded. So the proposed amendment would, again, retitle the section to height limits and exemptions, so it's a little bit more clear. And it also provides a list of the type of elements that would be exempt from building height. Some of those are listed in the staff report and also on the slide here. I won't read them. It should be noted that through this amendment, staff is proposing to make clear that any of the listed types of exemptions in the subsection would still allow the zoning administrator to review and determine whether there should be additional review at the planning commission level. So we would have that discretion to look at those types of proposed elements that would be above the building height. This slide is a summary of the collaboration and public comments. So we've worked on these proposed amendments with collaboration with several different departments, including Parks and Recreation, Public Works, and City Manager's Office. The noticing for this project is standard for public policy work and code amendments as listed on the slide. And to this, prior to this meeting, staff has not received any public comments regarding the proposed amendments. This last slide is staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission to recommend to the City Council adoption of the ordinance as listed here. It's also in the staff report, and also determine that the amendments are exempt pursuant to section 15061, which is the common sense exemption that's in CEQA. Following the Planning Commission meeting, the project would be scheduled for City Council review, and if adopted by City Council, would become effective 30 days after adoption. So that concludes staff's presentation.
All right, thank you, Julia. So at this time, I wanted to see if there's any questions. Well, let's see if there's any other, there are no other presentations than that. So we're going to move on to Planning Commission clarifying questions. Would anyone like to start?
Through the chair.
Okay.
Just a couple questions. One, for some of the city projects that you're talking about simplifying the process of how it gets to City Council. I saw photos in the presentation, and maybe those are intended to be examples. Could you provide one or two examples of the sort of the type of project, not a particular one that's come before per se, but the sort of thing just to help us understand the level of project that might be impacted by this change.
Sure. For city projects, for example, one of the photos was for the wastewater treatment plant. This is one of the cases that happened which helped prompt this code amendment. There was a set of fence, decorative fence, in front of the wastewater treatment plant that was reviewed by Planning Commission and City Council. Subsequent to approval, the city, through costing of the materials and everything, realized that the original design was going to be too cost prohibitive. So the city Public Works Department asked, what's the process for modifying that? The redesigned fence would still provide the screening that's necessary and would still relate to the educational elements that are in front of it. So it would meet the intent and purpose that the City Council was interested in. However, instead of the zoning administrator being able to review that and approve it at staff level, it was required, because our code didn't provide an option, it was required to come before the Planning Commission. Planning Commission at that time supported staff's recommendation, keeping in mind that this was a cost, to the community if we had to go with the original design. So going through that experience, adding two months to take the item to Planning Commission, and then around $5,000 for noticing and staff time to take an item to Planning Commission, that's,
Yeah.
Thank you. And through the chair, one more question. At the recommendation at the end, there's just a note about this going to City Council, so we're not approving, we're making a recommendation. When it goes to council, is it on like new business, or is it go on consent agenda? For that?
The first meeting would be new business as a public hearing, and then there's a second reading that would go on consent.
Thank you. No more questions for me, thanks.
Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. I actually had asked some questions prior to the meeting that Julia and Monero were able to answer, but I just wanted to provide some of the responses for the commission so that they could consider them. I think the best way is I can just read what you wrote me, so I don't put you on the spot. So the question I had was in section 27.08.080 under the major modification subsection. So I was asking what circumstances would trigger the categorization of a project modification that is quote, a change that is visually conspicuous from the public right-of-way or adjacent properties. So I asked, so that, end quote. So I was curious, what kind of changes would be considered to be approved at the staff level that could be visible, like on a building, say, for instance, like cost cutting or materials were not available during construction. Like what would be classified as that? And so I asked, would staff be able to provide a few examples of visually conspicuous changes that would be included in this category, and perhaps examples of changes that would not be visually conspicuous? And so the response was from staff, examples of visually conspicuous changes would include new windows or doors on elevations that are visible from the public right-of-way, new floor area exceeding the square footage of the originally approved planning application, less front or street side setback than the original approved planning application, or new windows, storefronts that were not part of the originally approved planning application. So those would be examples of visually conspicuous changes. Some examples that would not be visually conspicuous and that could be approved by staff would be replacing door window with a smaller door window on an elevation that is not visible due to another building, fence, or landscape screening. Change in amount of paved area in the rear or interior side yard. Change to first floor rear addition that is smaller than originally approved planning application. that is not visible due to another building, fence, or landscape screening. And then following that, Julia wrote, a change to a door color, material brick, window mullions, window size, etc., may be either a simple or minor modification. The zoning administrator would review and determine whether the change would be substantially consistent with the colors, window, door style, and the rest of the development as shown in the original planning application approval, and whether it's visually conspicuous and the other criteria in the proposed code. I would anticipate most changes to color or smaller windows are likely to be simple modifications. If the change introduces new windows that were not part of the original planning application approval, then the zoning administrator would review and determine whether the cumulative changes fall into the minor or major modification category based on the criteria in the proposed code. I just want to thank you for providing that information. That's helpful in understanding what this ordinance is offering. So I hope that if anybody has any questions about that. So that was one of the things that popped out as important to me.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that since I've been on the Planning Commission, we did have at least one project that I can think of, the one that's where the AAA building used to be, but it's by the main post office. And yeah, and I remember that coming back before us, and it was, you know, I mean, I don't know what category that would fall into, but it was relatively minor, but it was an architectural change on the outside of the building. So that was, I don't know where that would fall, but that was, it would have to be determined probably from the zoning administrator whether or not that was major. Okay. Any questions from Commissioner Patel or Ebner?
Thank you, through the chair. I have one question. It's actually not one of the changes, but it was something I read and I was just curious about. So it's the 4th page of the redlined version, which is section 427.06.020, the zoning administrator powers and duties. Section, trying to get these numbers right, section H6C. So H6C says the zoning administrator, if I'm understanding this correctly, has the power to grant special use permits that are for the substantial removal of existing residences in an R1 zoning district. And I was curious about that because I could have sworn I remembered reading in something else that's come before us that if a dwelling in an R1 district undergoes more than 50% demolition, then that is, I think, a discretionary decision that has to come before Planning Commission. So I was curious what substantial removal in this case means in terms of the power that the zoning administrator has.
So I do see that section. Again, we're not proposing to modify that. That section is consistent with the other section that you have in mind, which is 2718. So under 2718, which applies to single-family dwellings, if there is substantial removal, it requires a special use permit for that. That can be approved by the zoning administrator. And so the linkage between 2718 and this section of the code provides the zoning administrator that authority currently.
I see, okay.
I just want to comment on that one too, because I'm thinking back to like past things we've seen, and typically we get those zoning administrator notifications, and sometimes they're removal and rebuilding, and that, you know, and that's the way that goes. But then there was the one house in the Aragon neighborhood, or Baywood neighborhood, I guess, that came before us because they were anticipating an appeal, I guess. And so so it sounds like the applicant in that case, I think, had the right to request a public hearing for their project, if I remember correctly.
Typically, the zoning administrator would elevate, you know, and so it's not, the decision is not with the applicant. It's the zoning administrator's.
But in that case, they were anticipating, neighborhood comments and possible appeal, and so then the zoning administrator elevated it, so, okay.
Correct.
I was just trying to remember how that one went, because that was a full removal. Yeah, okay. Any questions from you? Okay, I have a question. So in the beginning, you talked about the first group, and there was some minor items that would fall into the category of going to the building department, or maybe it's the second group. I don't remember which group. Maybe it might have been the second group, sorry. And then some things would go through the building permit review process. And I guess I want to just clarify that process. I think I know what it is, but.
Yeah, I believe you're speaking to the modifications, the simple modifications that would go through the
I don't
building
know, it came
permit.
up on your slides, so that's where, I didn't actually find it in here. It was one of the first slides, I think. And I think that just means that it goes back to building department, but if it does, then, so maybe it's slide 3 or 4. Should have noted which slide. It said the second group, which is not city buildings, but approved applications, and that certain things would go back to the building department. And I'm sort of thinking, why do they need to go back to the building department?
Apologize, but is this the slide that you're talking about?
Yeah, that
Okay.
might be it, yeah. I don't know why.
So this is speaking to modifications to approved planning applications. So for example,
Yeah, so that's it, where it says building permit only. So does everything, like in anything where it's already been previously approved, would it go back to building anyway? Like, would it go back to the building department even if it's going to be a zoning administrator decision? I'm just wondering, because that's a whole nother, the reason I'm asking is because, that can be an onerous process. I mean, presumably not if it's a small modification, but.
most of the changes that we see that fall into the simple changes category typically are reducing the size of windows, shifting maybe the window location a few inches one way or the other. Those can be, or changes in landscaping instead of a certain type of tree that was approved. Maybe that tree species is now not good for this area. There's disease, so a replacement tree. Those can be reviewed and approved through the building permit process because they do not substantially change the original approval.
Okay.
Items that might fall in, I don't know if I addressed that question.
Yeah, I think you did. I guess my concern would be like, is there a case where that would be almost more onerous than going to the planning commission? Probably not, but.
All of these
If you end up with
changes,
plan check comments for something.
for all 3 levels, you would still need a building permit to document that. The question is that, with this proposed code amendment, there's a clear path of the type of projects and the criterias that can just go straight to building permits. So applicants have that clarity up front. And then, for minor modifications and major modifications, there's also criteria for those in the path. So they know up front, if they're going to propose changes, what that means in terms of additional time and cost.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Through the chair, if I may, this reminds me of some things that I see in my day job where you have an approved planning application, you go to get a building permit and you change your mind about something. It's a little bit different. So you'll take it in for a building permit. I'm not describing San Mateo's process, anyone correct me, but let's say you take it in for building permit and they say, this doesn't match your approved planning application. We're sending it to planning.
Planning, right.
And so that's when it goes through, I believe, one of these 3 filters. And so in fact, this is the least onerous because it only, speaking from an applicant perspective, it only goes back to the building department because planning has said we don't have a concern. Is that a fair Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. I understand what you're saying. Thank you. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, would anyone like to make any comments before we take a vote?
Do we need to open it up for public comment?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Are there any public, members of the public that would like to comment?
Chair Williams, right now we don't have any public commenters in person, but if you want to comment on Zoom, please raise your hand at this time. Looks like we don't have any public commenters at this time.
Okay, great. So at this time, we can close the public comment period for this item. And then we can go to Planning Commission deliberation, or at this point, or make a motion if we don't have any further deliberations. Would anyone, Commissioner Patel, I'll start with you. Would you like to make any comments on this?
I do not have any comments.
Nor do I.
I think I do have one comment to make, and I think that it's reflecting, a broad approval of these amendments. The only thing that I would like, and I think specifically the portion that I was asking about earlier, which is, major versus minor amendments to a project that could, have visual impacts. I personally believe that it's important that we give the zoning administrator the ability and discretion to determine what constitutes a major impact that needs to be reviewed. I would like to know if there's some sort of review mechanism. Say a project goes through, and the windows change to a point that, some people notice and they're like, oh, I really didn't like that change. Is there a way for feedback to go back to the zoning administrator for future projects or something from the city council that, hey, this kind of change, or, in the future, maybe we don't approve that without a review, or some sort of feedback that we can do? Because I do think that keeping it from those kinds of things continually going to the Planning Commission is a good thing. I just want to make sure that there's some way to continue a dialogue as far as like feedback for projects that go forward.
Through the chair, I can take a stab at that. So I think there's always an opportunity for the council to provide feedback, or the commission to provide feedback if they see something out in the community that they might have preferred that came before them. Ultimately, the three tracks that we are proposing, the substantial conformance is probably the easiest one, where it is done, administratively and ministerially. So there is no noticing, there is no appeal process. But both with minor and major modifications, there is an opportunity to appeal and to weigh in and to comment on those projects. So, I think the minor modifications are the tricky ones, where are they rising to the level where should we take it back to a full public hearing, or is the change minor enough and maybe on one facade we're just noticing and providing that heads up that something is changing is adequate? And if there are still concerns about it, there is that opportunity to comment and or even appeal a decision at the minor modification ZA level.
What would be that process? Say if somebody, if a project modifies something during the building permit phase and review, is it like, how would a member of the public appeal that, or ask about that? Or?
So there wouldn't be any notification for the simple changes. So the simple changes is at the building permit level, and there's no noticing requirement and no feedback loop associated with that. It's only at the minor modification and the major modification level. However, we do get comments from the public when there are building permits. When construction happens, people see it and they provide us comments. However, there isn't an appeal process or an opportunity to change things at that point.
So say it's a minor modification that doesn't go before the commission or the council. Does it still get noticed?
Yes.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you.
Through the chair,
go ahead.
I just wanted to remind the commission as well that there would be many associated public documents and public records that the public could review if requested.
Right, right. Yeah, it's more just triggering like a knowledge that, oh, this has changed, so if somebody wants to review. And I don't know if many people are going to ever do that, but I also think that it's important that we give the zoning administrator the power to do that, to make decisions, because it doesn't, we should trust the zoning administrator to understand and interpret our intents from, as we go on to make objective design standards and such. So I think that that's a good change overall.
Okay, Commissioner Wiggins, do you have any comments?
Just to briefly say that I'm appreciative of all the hard work that goes on at the staff level in multiple departments, and happy to play a small part in helping to make it a bit more streamlined on a daily basis. So supportive of it.
All right, yeah, I agree. I second that. All right, at this time then, maybe could you bring the slide back up that is your request or your recommendation?
Maybe the last slide. So this last slide is a summary of the recommendation that's in the staff report. Should the commission wish to, you could just make a general recommendation based on the staff report language.
Okay.
Instead of reading this slide.
Okay. Thank you. Streamlining all the way around. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the recommendation?
Through the chair, I'll make a motion to approve the recommendation provided in the staff report.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great. Thank you. Can I have a roll call vote?
Yes. Chair Williams?
Yes.
Vice Chair Nutter?
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent?
Yes.
Commissioner Patel?
Yes.
And Commissioner Wiggins?
Yes.
All right. With that, it passes. Or recommendation is approved. All right. So we can close that item and move on to reports and announcements. Are there any reports or announcements this evening?
Yes, thank you. I have a few that I would like to start with. So as I mentioned previously, we do have a meeting on May 23rd. And I just wanted to check with the commission to see if we will have a full house or if anybody's joining remotely. Okay, everybody's present.
We'll all be here.
That's great. Thank you. We'll have the one item that I'd mentioned before, and of course the continued item as well. And then same for June 13th. That's going to be our next meeting. Any absences or remote attendance?
Through the chair, remote attendance for me.
For June 13th? Okay, thank you. We'll take note.
Thank you.
In addition to that, I wanted to flag for the commission that I sent an email out, I think it was yesterday, relating to some trainings that are coming up. That's from the Planning Collaborative. One of the trainings is in May, I believe it's at the end of May, and it's going to be on housing laws. So I sent you the link if you'd like to sign up. Please let us know if you are attending, just so we can keep track of how many commissioners are going to be there, and making sure we don't run afoul of any Brown Act laws.
I think I signed up already. I clicked and I think I signed up already, so.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, please let us know,
great.
me and Ashley, I think, if you can just confirm that you'll be attending. And then there is a second one in October that's going to be on current issues in San Mateo. So I think that's broader San Mateo, the county of San Mateo. But I think that should also be an interesting forum to understand some of the issues facing the peninsula. I also wanted to note that the planning division is a little bit light on staff at the moment. We are down 2 planners, so we are a little bit, constricted in terms of what we're doing. And of course, we have some big projects that we're working on at the moment. So appreciate your patience with us and your help to keep us on track. That's all the reports from me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, good luck with the staffing. Hopefully you can do some hiring. All right, any other announcements or comments from the commissioners?
Through the chair, I had some questions for staff. I actually don't know if this is the right time to ask questions or place, but you can let me know. Because the topic of today's agenda was streamlining, I was curious. I know there's been a couple of laws that have passed recently that have gone into effect this year. SB 897 is another ADU law. And then we've talked before about AB 2097, which is the parking requirements. I was curious if we had any plans to further revise our ADU ordinance to conform to SB 897. But now that I hear about the planning department being light on people, I can understand that might be something that's not a high priority at this time. And then for AB 2097, I actually was curious about, again, updating our code to be in line with that, and just wanted to call out that I've seen some news articles about other cities that are running into, maybe not problems, but challenges with bike infrastructure as it relates to parking, and needing to be careful that there's still a way to require bicycle parking in storage facilities, even as car parking requirements may change. And so anyway, I was just curious if we have plans to revise our codes in the near future to be in line with those two new laws.
Yes, through the chair, we are always trying to revise our codes to be in line with legislation. Of course, there is a bit of a, a catching up that we always have to do. I think on the ADU laws, absolutely, we've looked at the laws, and we updated the ADU ordinance last year, and we had committed at the time to council that we'll come back with a report. I think it was a 2-year report, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, once our housing element is done, that would be something that we bring back again. On AB 2097, we're already seeing requests from developers on applying those requirements. And of course, the city defers to the state when it comes to that kind of legislation. So we're already applying the requirements under AB 2097 to projects that are under review.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes.
I have a couple of items that I would like to discuss and see what the procedures or what the procedure may be. And open it up to discussion with the commission. So I was curious if the commission, and if this is the appropriate time to address it, would be open to a study session on the housing element update prior to submittal to HCD. It's something that I was curious if there's any interest or support in a study session, and if this would be the appropriate time to address that.
Through the chair, at this point, staff is working on the HCD comment letters and making adjustments to the adopted housing element. We do anticipate a city council study session in the coming weeks. So I would certainly update you once we have that date available. I think it's really up to the council to determine, what path we take with the future updates of the housing element. And we anticipate, based on what we've heard from other cities, that it is an iterative process. So we anticipate some back and forth with HCD before we can, get some confirmation on what approaches may work for them, and then bring that back to Planning Commission and Council for adoption at a later date. So that's our anticipated process, and I don't think the City Council will be driving what that looks like.
Excuse me. So do we have the ability as a commission to request a study session for ourselves? I know in the past it had been requested or discussed where the Planning Commission could have had a study session, a joint study session with council, and that was not moved forward. And I thought that the current timeline was April, May to address the letter, the current letter from HCD, and then in June submit without even going back to the council.
Not at this point, Commissioner Ebneter. And again, it's a little sensitive to have a discussion about the housing element because that's not agendized.
Okay.
If you would like to request a joint study session with council, that's perfectly fine. If you'd like to mention that to council or write a letter to them or vote on that, I would imagine, Mazreen, I'm going to ask you to weigh in if that would be appropriate at this point. However, it'll be up to the council to determine the next
Through the
path.
chair, I believe what Commissioner Ebneter is asking, correct me if I'm wrong, is if we can request not a joint study session, but just a study session for ourselves? Because I think, if I'm understanding the schedule from what Commissioner Netter just said, the plan is to bring it back to Planning Commission after it has received certification from HCD, but before it's been adopted. And at that point, I'm struggling to understand what value Planning Commission would add at that point if it's been certified by HCD. So I think the question is there an opportunity for the commission to ask for a study session before it's submitted to HCD?
Well, if
Through
this
the
is
chair, I wouldn't mind weighing in if I could. It's Christina Horsper, the CDD director. And so the question of a joint study session and a future study sessions with Planning Commission did come up at the City Council meeting not too long ago. And the question of a joint study session came up, and the City Council decided not to have a joint study session. The Planning Commission would see the housing element again before it is certified by the state, but when it is a little further along. And so if you want to have some weigh-in as to the timing, I think it's perfectly fine to make a recommendation through the Community Development Department as to what you would like that timing to be, and we would be happy to forward that recommendation or request onto the City Council. I think that would be very appropriate for us to ask them on your behalf what you would like to see, but we do have a plan to bring it back to you at some point prior to state certification for some kind of weigh-in, but when it's more formulated and it's taken on a little more shape so that we have something to bring to you that you can really weigh in on. Right now, we're not far enough along on it, and we need more weigh-in from City Council to have more direction on it before we would feel comfortable bringing it back. And they have weighed in on it a bit in that regard as well.
Okay, thank you, Christina. I guess that leaves us with one option, and how would that be addressed? Would a planning commissioner or would the chair discuss this offline to see if we could work a schedule and what might be appropriate timing-wise? Or I'm not exactly sure.
Are you asking about what Christina just suggested?
Yeah.
Like, what's the timing of when we would see it?
Yeah. How would we even know what would be the appropriate time?
I think maybe what we could do at staff level is to put together a tentative schedule that maybe we could bring to you as an information item, and you could weigh in on it as an information item. And if you wanted to collectively make any suggested edits, we could bring that maybe as part of one of our next City Council items. And we have been bringing that, our suggested schedule and timeline to them, and they can make adjustments as to where they think that fits in.
Perfect. So I may have read information that isn't valid any longer. So obviously things change, and you're not going to go back and change documentations from past meetings just for obvious purposes. Okay. So I had one other request. I think you're all most probably aware of the outfit that's called One Shoreline, the county initiative addressing a variety of climate issues along the shoreline and how they impact the 12 cities of San Mateo that abut to the shoreline. And they recently issued a planning guidance policy document, which is specifically geared toward assisting the jurisdictions in how to address the variety of climate change issues, specifically along the shoreline. And I know that the city of San Mateo has participated in discussions with One Shoreline, and they've got this document that's out helping policymakers understand the problems and how you can integrate them into not only your general plan, but specific plans and the housing element. My question is, would this commission be interested in a study session presented by One Shoreline as it pertains to our involvement with the documents that we're currently working on housing element, general plan, and specific plans. If there's interest, I would like to know and see if there's a way for us to schedule something like that.
Through the chair, I'd be very interested in that. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. I'd also be interested in the prior item relating to some more information on the housing element timeline. So thank you for bringing both of those up.
Same, yeah.
Yeah, I would be interested in both as well. And it would be somehow agendized, apparently.
Okay, so is that enough to get staff at least on the one shoreline component?
Yes,
Perfect.
thank you.
Perfect, great. Thank you for listening to me, and hopefully we can get some good information. Thanks again, that was it.
Yep, absolutely. Any other announcements from commissioners or comments? Okay, well, with that, then, I think we can adjourn tonight's meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.